In 1985, Steve Jobs lost power inside the company he had created. Apple was not just his employer. It was the public stage for his identity, his taste, and his belief that computers could become personal objects of desire. Most founders never recover from that kind of exile. Jobs did something stranger. Years later, he came back and built Apple again. The comeback is what makes the story more than a rise and fall biography. It turns Jobs into a case study in how taste, power, failure, and timing can meet inside one company. That contradiction is the real story. Steve Jobs was not simply a genius inventor betrayed by a boardroom. He was also a volatile leader whose intensity created conflict around him. The same force that made Apple feel different also made him difficult to contain. So the question is not only how Apple pushed him out, the deeper question is what kind of person could build Apple twice. To answer that, this documentary does not begin with his childhood, it begins with the fall. Because the fall reveals the machine inside the myth. Vision mixed with ego, simplicity born from chaos, and a rare ability to make people believe in a future before that future was obvious. Jobs was often described as an inventor, but that word can mislead the story. He was not mainly the engineer in the room. He did not personally invent every circuit, every interface, or every product that carried Apple's name. His gift was different. He could look at technology and sense what needed to be removed, softened, simplified, dramatized, and made desirable. In a normal technology story, the hero solves the technical problem. In the Jobs story, the deeper problem was often emotional. Why should anyone care about this machine at all? For Jobs, a computer was never only a machine. It was a relationship. The box mattered. The typography mattered. The sound, the curve, the packaging, the first moment a customer touched the product, all of it mattered. He understood that technology becomes powerful when it stops feeling like technology and starts feeling like an extension of the person using it. That is why Jobs was so unusual. He connected engineering with design, design with business, business with culture, and culture with emotion. He did not invent the future alone. He edited it. And the edit was often brutal. Fewer buttons, fewer choices, fewer compromises, and a clearer story. This is also why he could be so frustrating. Editing requires judgment, but Jobs often treated judgment as command and command as proof that he was right. The first Apple story begins with a contrast. Steve Wozniak was the brilliant builder, the engineer who could make elegant machines with limited parts. Jobs was the force who saw that a machine could become a product could become a company, and a company could become a movement. Together, they helped push personal computing out of the hobbyist world and toward ordinary people. Their partnership worked because their strengths were different. Wozniak could make the machine real. Jobs could make the machine matter to people who had never imagined owning one. The Apple II Zecad became one of the defining machines of that early era. It was not just a board for enthusiasts. It helped make the personal computer feel usable, expandable, and commercially meaningful. For Apple, it created momentum. For Jobs, it proved that technology did not have to stay hidden inside laboratories, corporations, and universities. But Jobs wanted more than useful machines. He wanted computers with personality. The Macintosh became the clearest expression of that ambition, visual-friendly and presented almost like a cultural event. The idea was radical for its time. A computer could be personal, visual, and beautiful. It could have a face. It could have a voice. It could feel like the future had been designed for humans. The Macintosh did not win simply because it was advanced. It mattered because it introduced a different emotional promise. Computing could become approachable instead of intimidating. The problem was that ambition is expensive. The Macintosh was bold, but the business around it was complicated. Jobs could generate belief, pressure, and attention. What he could not yet generate was the management discipline needed to scale a growing company without burning the room around him. By the mid-1980s, Apple was no longer a garage experiment. It was a real corporation with investors, managers, products, politics, and pressure. Jobs' intensity, once part of the company's energy, became a source of internal friction. His standards were high. His patience was low. His conviction could inspire teams, but it could also exhaust them. Startups can survive this kind of tension for a while because urgency covers the damage. Larger companies cannot. They need repeatable systems, not just emotional momentum. This is the first major conflict in the Jobs story. The same obsession that made him valuable also made him dangerous. He wanted control over the product, the message, and the experience. Apple needed discipline, predictable execution, and a structure that could survive beyond one person's will. Those needs collided. In 1985, after a power struggle inside Apple, Jobs lost operational control and eventually left. The public myth often simplifies this moment into betrayal. The business reality was messier. Jobs had vision, but vision without maturity can become chaos. Apple pushed away the person who gave it identity, because that identity had become hard to manage. That is the first lesson of the film. Genius can open a door. But if it cannot work with scale, the company it creates may eventually defend itself from its creator. Jobs did not disappear. After Apple, he founded NeXT, a company that tried to build powerful, elegant computers for higher education and professional users. The machines were beautiful, serious, and expensive. NeXT did not become a mass-market triumph. But its operating system and software ideas would become far more important than its sales numbers. Its black cube looked less like a consumer computer and more like a manifesto. It showed that Jobs still wanted objects to communicate seriousness before they were even turned on. NeXT forced Jobs into a different kind of struggle. At Apple, he had been part of a fast-rising phenomenon. At NeXT, he had to sell a difficult product into a skeptical market. The company showed his weaknesses: perfectionism, high cost, and a tendency to prioritize elegance over commercial reality. But it also gave him experience building deep technology outside Apple's shadow. In pure business terms, NeXT was frustrating. In strategic terms, it preserved a set of ideas that Apple would later need when its own operating system strategy was running out of time. Then there was Pixar. Jobs purchased the computer graphics group from George Lucas and helped turn it into an independent company. At first, Pixar was not the movie empire people remember today. It was fragile, technical, and uncertain. Jobs kept funding it through years when the business case was not obvious. The popular version makes Pixar sound inevitable. It was not. For years, it was a bet on a future where computers, art, and storytelling could become one industry. Pixar changed Jobs in a way NeXT could not. It placed him near artists, storytellers, animators, and technologists who needed time to make something emotionally alive. Toy Story became the breakthrough. It proved that computer animation could carry a full-feature film, but it also proved something Jobs needed to understand. Technology is strongest when it serves story. That lesson mattered later at Apple. The best technology presentation is not a list of technical achievements. It is a story about how life feels after the product exists. Exile did not make Jobs gentle, but it made him more complete. NeXT gave him technical foundations Apple would later need. Pixar gave him a deeper respect for culture, narrative, and creative teams. The version of Jobs who returned to Apple was still controlling. But he had seen failure, patience, and storytelling from the outside. While Jobs was being reshaped, Apple was drifting. By the 1990s, the company had too many products, confusing names, weak focus, and a fading identity. Customers could still love the Mac, but Apple no longer seemed to know what story it was telling. The company had technology, but not clarity. A brand can survive weak products for a while, and products can survive weak branding for a while. But when both become unclear, the company starts losing its center. The financial picture was brutal. Sales were falling, losses were large, and confidence in the Macintosh platform was weakening. This matters because Jobs' return was not magic. Apple did not need another inspirational poster. It needed someone willing to cut, simplify, and make painful choices. The crisis gave Jobs leverage. He could ask for cuts that would have seemed too extreme in calmer times, because Apple no longer had the luxury of endless complexity. Apple acquired NeXT, and with it came the founder it had once pushed out. Jobs returned first as an advisor, then became the central force again. What he brought back was not just new software. He brought back a way of seeing. Apple had to become understandable again. Jobs' first great weapon in the comeback was focus. He looked at Apple's crowded product lineup and saw confusion. The answer was not to make more products. It was to remove almost everything that did not matter. Fewer machines, clearer categories, stronger design. A company that could explain itself in a simple grid. The famous simplicity of the comeback was not soft or gentle. It was surgical. To focus the company, Jobs had to make decisions that removed projects, habits, and internal politics. This was classic Jobs. To him, simplicity was not decoration. It was strategy. Every extra product created manufacturing complexity, marketing confusion, and emotional noise. A focused company could move faster, tell a stronger story, and make each product feel more important. He also rebuilt Apple around control of hardware, software, design, retail, and presentation. Critics saw that control as closed and restrictive. Jobs saw it as the only way to protect the experience. In his mind, if Apple did not control the whole journey, the magic would leak out. That belief explains both Apple's strength and its limits. The company could deliver unusually coherent products, but it also built a culture where compromise often felt like contamination. The iMac was the first clear signal that Apple was alive again. It did not simply update the desktop computer. It made the computer feel friendly, colorful, and desirable at a time when many PCs looked anonymous. The iMac said Apple still knew how to make people look twice. The design did something business textbooks often underestimate. It changed the emotional temperature of the category. Suddenly, a desktop computer could look playful without feeling unserious. Then came the iPod. Digital music already existed, but it was fragmented and awkward. Jobs understood that the winning product would not be the device with the most technical explanation. It would be the one that made the behavior feel obvious. Carry your music with you, sync it easily, and stop thinking about the file system. The iPod moved Apple beyond the computer. It made Apple a consumer electronics company, a music company, and a lifestyle brand. More importantly, it taught Apple how a device, software, store, and brand could work together. That ecosystem thinking would become the foundation for something much bigger. The iPod also made the Apple brand portable in a new way. People carried it in public. The white earbuds became advertising that customers wore for free. In 2007, Jobs introduced the iPhone as a combination of phone, music player, and internet communicator. The deeper change was not the list of features. It was the interface. Touch made the device feel direct. Software made it expandable. The phone became a pocket computer, a platform, and eventually the center of daily life. The iPhone also changed Apple's economic position. It was no longer only competing in personal computers or music players. It was entering the most personal device category in modern life. This is the pattern across Jobs' greatest products. He did not just sell devices. He sold behavior changes. The iMac changed how a computer could look in a home. The iPod changed how music moved with people. The iPhone changed how people touched the internet. Jobs understood that a product becomes powerful when it changes what feels normal. That is why specs alone do not explain Jobs. The real question was not what the device contained. It was what the device made people stop tolerating afterward. But the polished surface came from a difficult process. Jobs could be harsh, demanding and controlling. People around him could experience his standards as inspiration, pressure, or fear, depending on the day and the person. The products looked simple, but the path to simplicity was often emotionally expensive. This cost should not be treated as a charming detail. Pressure can produce excellence, but it can also narrow a culture until people confuse fear with standards. This is where the documentary must stay honest. Jobs' perfectionism helped produce extraordinary work, but that does not make every method admirable. Some people found him visionary, others found him cruel. Both reactions can be true, because leadership is not only measured by the final product. It is also measured by what the process does to people. The hard question is whether we can separate the result from the method. Apple's products changed industries. Pixar changed animation, but the Jobs model also encouraged a dangerous myth that brilliance excuses damage, and that pressure is always the price of greatness. That lesson is too simple and too convenient. A mature view has to hold both truths at the same time. The work was extraordinary, and some of the behavior behind it should not be romanticized. So why was Jobs different? Not because he had one rare skill, but because several rare skills collided in one person. Taste, focus, simplicity, control, storytelling, product intuition, a willingness to say no. And above all, the ability to make a team, a market, and an audience believe that a product was not just useful, but inevitable. Most executives have one or two of those traits. Jobs had enough of them together that his personality became a system: product, marketing, culture, and control reinforcing one another. People called this his reality distortion field. It was not magic. It was charisma, intensity, argument, pressure, and conviction applied so strongly that people around him could start believing impossible timelines and impossible standards were possible. Sometimes that belief produced breakthroughs. Sometimes it pushed people too far. The danger was that belief can become coercion. When a leader makes the impossible feel necessary, people may exceed their limits or be punished for having limits at all. Jobs was not only building computers, he was building belief. A keynote became a ritual, a product reveal became a story. A store became a tempo for the brand. He made technology feel less like a tool and more like an object people could desire, defend, and identify with. The legacy is powerful because it is everywhere. Apple and Pixar became part of global culture. Product launches became theater. Design became strategy. Ecosystems became business models. User experience became a boardroom language, not just a design department concern. Even companies outside technology absorbed the lesson. The launch became part of the product. The ecosystem became part of the business. The feeling became part of the value. But the lesson is not to copy Steve Jobs. The lesson is more complicated. Taste matters, focus matters, vision matters, story matters. But obsession always has a cost, and the cost is usually paid by the people closest to the work. That is the difference between studying Jobs and worshipping him. Study the standards, the clarity, and the storytelling. Do not copy the cruelty or pretend the damage was required. The world remembers Steve Jobs as a genius. But his real power was more complicated. He made technology feel inevitable, personal, and desirable. He built companies, but more than that, he built a way of seeing technology as something people could love. And years after his death, companies are still trying to copy not just what he built, but the belief he created.